Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi, and today we're going to be talking about Wilds of Eldraine from our own unique budget perspective. We already talked about the pre-order bundles, who those were for, and, well, in some cases, who they weren't. And stay tuned because we've got an entire season's worth of set coverage coming out over the next 2 or 3 weeks. But hey, before we get into all that, I wanted to take just a moment to thank my community for helping the Stronghold reach a bit of a long-term goal here. 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel. Definitely a tremendous thing. Thank you for all the views, all the subs, all the likes, all the comments, and just generally being a very supportive community. It means so much more than you'll ever know. And hey, what do you do when you reach a goal? You set a new one. So moving forward, my main talking point goal is going to be to reach just 50 followers over on Twitch. And frankly, we're already about halfway there, so this one should be really, really easy. If you're not already following me on Twitch, please consider doing so. And that always gives you kind of a sneak peek of some of the live play content, things like that. And of course, the support continues to help the community grow. And I'll be thinking up a giveaway to do once we get there. Probably not a whole account this time around, but hey, that's okay. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, right. The first thing we need to talk about in the Wilds of Eldraine is the set within the set, Enchanting Tales. This is going to be a total of 63 cards, which is going to replace a common in every store, win, or limited pack available out there. And they haven't dropped the drop rates just yet, but if each one of these cards has the same chance of showing up, you're looking at a pack of Wilds of Eldraine containing on average 1.7 rares or higher rarity card. And the remaining 0.3 is going to have an uncommon instead of a common. So there is a lot of value right off the bat in this set. But not every card in Enchanting Tales is going to be new to Arena. In fact, with just a rough count, I believe there's 19 Arena reprints here. Cards like Dragon Mantle that have not only already been printed, so to speak, on Arena, but at a lower rarity. So try and keep in mind, if you're going to spend wild cards to get these, make sure you're getting the best value. And those are the ones we're going to talk about here. I believe there's 7 cards to keep in mind. Dragon Mantle, for instance, no matter which copy you have, is actually going to be pauper playable. Similarly, Kindred Discovery is now going to be available as a mythic, but was available to us during the Baldur's Gate set as a rare. And again, Smothering Tide, currently a mythic offering, but was available back in the last Ravnica set for only a rare wildcard. And another value challenge, Parallel Lives, now a mythic, where it had been available as just a rare. Now, to flip the script a little bit, Fiery Emancipation is now available to us as a rare in the Enchanting Tales set, but had previously been offered on Arena only as a mythic. And the same can be said for As Foretold for those blue players out there. So in short, before you go into any kind of pick situation like a value draft, for instance, make sure you're aware of what you can get and what you already have. The last card I wanted to talk about in this sequence is Raid Bombardment, which is still an uncommon offering, but just be aware you actually have 2 of these already in your collection from the New Player Experience Mono Red deck. So don't be over aggressive in drafting this because, well, you got a good head start. Lastly, with regard to the Enchanting Tales, please be aware there are 6 cards which are preemptively banned for the historic format. And of course, that is going to affect the way these cards are used and thusly how you should be collecting them. One additional note I personally would make is with regard to Blood Moon. That is a staple sideboard card for the modern format, which I seriously believe is going to be the next step in Arena's growth. So now is a good time to get it before anybody else is onto it. Hey guys, as we get started with this budget perspective, let me get you to lean in real close. I got a secret for you. It turns out higher rarity cards are good. Okay, I admit that's not much of a secret. And that's exactly why I'm not going to spend our time talking about all the good rares and mythics. There are plenty of other content creators willing to do that. And since I know that a budget player following our plan is only about 70% likely to have any given rare and only about 50% likely to have any given mythic, with the actual playset statistics going even further down than that very rapidly, I'm just not going to spend our time that way. Instead, I'm going to turn our magnifying glass towards those commons and uncommons because, those are cards you're going to have, and I want you to be able to get the most bang for your buck. Now, of course, with that having been said, this is one of those rare occasions where I am going to talk about a rare card in the budget perspective video. And that's because this is a truly unique sort of card. I am not sure we have had a 2-mana rock come through standard during the Arena era. And if we have, there certainly hasn't been one of this quality. Not only is it acceleration that could be run in every deck, and I'm not saying that every deck will run it, but it also becomes a very useful equipment for us. And do note the fact that the name of the card changes when it becomes the equipment. So you could play the Iron Crag, convert it over by playing a legendary creature, and then play a second copy of Iron Crag without popping the first, because again, the name has changed. This is one of those cards that, like I said, I don't know that every deck is going to run it, even though it could. But I do feel pretty confident that everybody is going to want one, if not 2 copies of this card. And if somebody finds a way to use it in standard, it is probably a 3 or 4 of. So long story short, if that's still possible, I would not pass this card in a draft. I would snatch that up real quick. And to start off the conversation about the set mechanically, let's talk about adventures. Of course, this is a returning mechanic, even for us Arena players. We not only saw it in the last Eldraine set, but it was also featured pretty heavily in the D&D inspired Baldur's Gate set that we saw in the summer of 2022. The idea is you get a creature that also has an instant or sorcery spell, well, for lack of a better way of saying it, stapled to it. That means each and every one of these cards has a degree of built-in card advantage, because while your opponent is drawing 1 non-adventure card, you are, in a way, drawing 2 cards. The idea being, when you cast the spell side of it, the creature remains in exile and available for you to cast, so you can get double duty out of each and every card. And let's not forget that you can skip the adventure altogether and go directly to the creature if that's something that you need for your board state. Also, this set has brought us what I believe is our first adventure themed legendary creature / commander, and I will be taking any opportunity I can to build that brawl / historic brawl deck. I think it's really very interesting. It's even in the right colors. Last time we saw the adventure decks, Teamer was always the best way to go, so definitely looking forward to it. Before we move on from adventures, I want to talk about the card Chancellor of Tales. It's a 4-mana 2/3 flyer uncommon, and it has a nice little text box. Whenever you cast an adventure spell, you may copy it you may choose new targets for the copy. The last time we saw that in Standard was on a 2-mana artifact, exact same text box. That, of course, was Lucky Clover, and that card turned out to be so good that it had to be banned in Standard. And obviously, something like a creature is a whole lot easier to remove than an artifact, particularly in a limited environment. But I would not count out Chancellor of Tales whatsoever, especially with 2 relevant creature types on board. Next up, we have the roll mechanic, and I think this is going to be the defining mechanic for this set and its limited environment. If this is successful, so go the limited environments. Rolls are mechanically pretty simple to understand. They are token aura enchantments. Most of them give a creature that it lands on an additional +1/+1 and some secondary effect. In some cases it's trample, in other cases it's ward, etc., etc. There are 2 exceptions to that. The first being Young Hero, where it receives a +1/+1 every time it swings. The other is the Cursed Roll mechanic, or excuse me, the Cursed Roll token, which turns the creature into a base power and toughness of 1/1, and I believe it does not lose its other abilities, so do keep that in mind. You're just changing the combat math, not static or triggered effects. So definitely use cautiously. There is a lot of overlap here because these are enchantments, and in fact the green-white and black-white deck archetypes within the limited environment look to be mechanically built around enchantments matter to some degree or the other. And of course, who could forget, we have a green-white Enchantress deck already in Standard. That being said, I don't think there's a huge amount of overlap between these roll tokens and the existing Standard deck, because most of the cards in the Kamigawa-inspired deck are triggered upon casting of your enchantments, and of course rolls are simply created from other effects that were cast. They are never cast themselves. So I don't see a Enchantress super deck coming to Standard out of the roll mechanic, although there probably will be 2 or 3 cards that cross over nicely and make one version or the other of the deck better. Now, I've talked a good bit about the value of the packs in this set, and well, that's not the only bargain to be had. Bargain is, of course, a new mechanic that is attached to other instant sorceries or creatures, and in some cases even enchantments. These allow you to sacrifice a artifact, enchantment, or token which is already on the battlefield in order to get an additional effect from the card you are currently casting. And most of them are pretty good on their own, and when you're able to bargain away something at a lower value, you're generally getting a really good deal here, or a significant bargain to push the pun. Wilds of Eldraine gives us a lot of things we can bargain away, be those roll tokens, there's a lot of food tokens, there's a smattering of treasure, any sacrificial creature like the rat token creatures that we see a lot in this deck, not to mention all the other not rat token creatures. There are 2 things really that I wanted to bring up specifically about bargains. There are 2 sagas that have what I would term as a negative final chapter. So if you could bargain those away prior to their 3rd chapter or final chapter triggering, they are significantly better. And one of those is an Is It a rare card that is just head and shoulders better without the 3rd chapter, and the other is a white uncommon that might actually have some build around potential, but we'll have to see. And if you're looking for a really good bargain target that does not come from Wilds of Eldraine. The Kamigawa Neon Dynasty card, Iron Apprentice, is a 1/1 artifact that when it leaves the battlefield leaves behind its +1/+1 counters, is really an ideal candidate to consider. The final mechanic for us to talk about in Wilds of Eldraine is Celebration, and this mechanic looks to be centered primarily around the red-white cards, and they care about having 2 or more permanents enter the battlefield that turn. And it's really easy to trigger that given the amount of things that bring role tokens, food tokens, treasure tokens, or token creatures along with them. Not to mention 2 spelling in a turn isn't terribly hard to do. Contrary to what the name suggests, I don't think this mechanic is going to be really game state meta altering in standard, and I'm not even sure about how reliable this is going to happen in a limited environment. I really think it's going to be harder to trigger this consistently than people are thinking that it is. That having been said, it doesn't matter if the 2 tokens enter together at the same time, or as I said, just 2 spelling and bringing 2 separate things in. 3rd, 4th, 5th permanents entering the battlefield also don't really matter, because most of these are true-false tests. Either you have had 2 or more enter, or you have not. Degrees don't really matter, and I can't recall having seen one of them that would have instance to trigger more than once in a single turn. As far as a budget perspective on this, I don't think this is going to be a strong enough mechanic to create a new red-white archetype for standard, and sadly I don't think it lines up enough with the existing Boros starter deck to really offer any help there whatsoever. And now let's talk about the individual cards, and I once again have to talk about reprints. Prophetic Prism, Evolving Wild, and Crystal Grotto are all in this set once again as fixing. None of these cards are even new to standard. Prophetic Prism, for instance, has been printed 4 times so far during the arena era. This will make its 5th. Evolving Wilds is even more than that, and has 2 printings in standard. And Crystal Grotto, I'm not sure how many total times, but it's not even new to standard once again, having been printed within the last year. Now, in particular, as we have moved to a 3-year standard, I would really like to see Wizards of the Coast take up a model or mindset where they don't reprint a card into standard itself. They need to diversify some of these mechanically limited oriented cards to have more options available. Prophetic Prism I can certainly see in this set, as it does create a bargainable item that you really don't mind going to the graveyard once you have used its color fixing capabilities to its fullest extent. But its earlier printing really didn't add that much to that set, and I would like to see design teams talk about these cards a little bit more and stop oversaturating standard with reprints just for the sake of limited. And the reprints don't stop there. We have Lantern, which was printed last year. Now, granted, this is adding it to standard because its prior printing was for a bonus sheet in, I believe it was Brothers War, so it wasn't legal in standard. So at least that's adding something. Glass Casket and the blue counterspell whose name escapes me at the moment, Disdainful Stroke, there we go. Those are at least new to standard, although they are reprinted. Glass Casket, of course, from the prior Eldraine, and I'm not sure it's going to see quite the same play value that it did there, because it was a lot more artifacts matter going on there. This set seems to be much more oriented towards enchantments matter, but time will tell. Disdainful Stroke, of course, adds something for the mono blue deck for folks that are building it for the first time. And I think the most disturbing reprint here is Titanic Growth. I mean, there's got to be at least 15 different mono green growth style cards that available to pick. And picking one that's not even new to standard in the 3-year model, frankly, just feels lazy. And again, I'd like to see Wizards get away from that. Ginger Brute, of course, on the opposite end of the spectrum, is the common reprint that we all, I think, wanted in this set. And frankly, I'm a little surprised that we got. This little common saw a lot of play in the prior standard and continues to see some play in Eternal. And this is a great opportunity for newer players to pick this card up, or older players to maybe finish out a play set that they were a little late to the party on. Next up, we've got the Signpost uncommons for the set. And not only are all of these legendary creatures, but each and every one of the archetypes they represent is based on a fairy tale storybook sort of thing. You're going to see the Sorcerer's Apprentice in here, Gretel, aka Hansel and Gretel. You're going to see Little Red Riding Hood, the Pied Piper, Jack and the Beanstalk, a lot of those favorites that many of us grew up with as children and were beloved stories. I, for one, still have a copy of The Sorcerer's Apprentice, and I'm almost 50. So there you go. Not only are these interesting from a storytelling perspective, all puns included, these are also mechanically pretty sound, not only in the individual card, but in the deck archetypes that they represent. I can tell you I'm having a hard time sorting through the 10 archetypes in order to make those budget draft archetype recommendations, because the difference between the worst ones on the first pass and the very best ones on the first pass is really not all that much. And it wouldn't take very much to change that in the here and now, as well as additional cards get added to standard over time. So this one is going to be a tough one, but all of these really solid cards. Because they are legendary creatures, that means for many budget players, a single copy in the collection is going to be enough. And even for the ones that we end up doing a dedicated build-around deck, often 2 or 3 copies is going to be sufficient. In other words, there's not many of these, if any, that you're going to need a 4th copy for. And of course, that changes the budget a little bit when it comes to finishing out your common and uncommon playsets. All right, before we move on to those specific budget recommendations, I do want to take just a moment and remind everyone that we do know, in fact, that change is coming to Arena, although we don't know the specific timetable. But Chris Kurtz has made specific references to updates to the daily, weekly rewards to move them away from just winning matters. He also has stated that there are going to be advancements in the duplicate protection, hopefully addressing some of those reprint issues that I have mentioned in this video at the common and uncommon levels. In both cases, we don't know exactly what that means, but it might change our perspectives a little bit for not only this set, but Arena moving forward. Now, first off, many of us skipped the Lord of the Rings summer set this year because we just don't have a strong interest in alchemy. And that means we have about 80,000 gold on average saved up to use over the course of the next year. However, all signs point to the fact that next summer set is most likely going to be Modern Horizons 3. And I am personally recommending that everyone, no matter how long they have been on Arena, participate in that set actively. So all of the budgets that I'm talking about for this coming year, until we have information to the contrary, is going to be based on 5 collecting sets per year. And that means you're going to have about 85,000 gold in income on average for those sets. With that in mind, if, like me, you skipped a Lord of the Rings and have that 80,000 or so gold pieces saved up, I am recommending 7 jump-in events, only 3 quick drafts for this set, and no premiums. Premium tokens, I am recommending saving for Khans of Tarkir. Again, regardless of how long you have or have not been on Arena, I think that is the best use of tokens for the time being at the very least. So again, 3 quick drafts for this set, accounting for 2 discount packs at 850 gold apiece. That seems to be the going rate. And then buying 2 45 pack bundles from the store for a total of 90 packs. And then, of course, 1 gems deal for each season seems to be the norm. Now, that means that we overspent this season by about 30,000 gold. That, of course, being the additional 45,000 for packs, offset by the number of quick drafts that we don't have to do because of all those additional packs. So that will leave us about 50,000 gold in our Lord of the Rings piggy bank to carry forward into future sets. Again, those daily quest, weekly quest figures might change a little bit. There might be some adjustments there, but honestly, I'm not expecting them to make huge economic changes. I think it's going to be more of a flavor-based concept to reward more things, not necessarily to reward more. And now moving on to my standard-based players that don't have an interest specifically in alchemy and were not around or chose not to save the Lord of the Rings funds for them. As you can see, the income expectations are exactly the same, coming out to about 85,000 gold for each of the 5 sets over the next year. Still recommending 7 jump-in events. Quick drafts have doubled up to 6 to account for the fact that we are going to be bringing in less packs, that being 2 discount packs that are expected roughly each season, and 1 of the 45 pack bundles that still gives you 1 extra rare, and buying 1 gems deal available hopefully within each season. That leaves you roughly 1,000 gold to carry forward or to dump into an additional pack, etc., etc. But all in all, a pretty standard budget here for folks not interested in alchemy and don't have the extra funds from Lord of the Rings. And finally, my budget recommendation for those players that do embrace the alchemy format. Again, the income expectations are exactly the same, about 85,000 gold. For expenditures, I'm still recommending 7 jump-in events, the 2 discount packs when they come up, and 1 gems deal. The main difference here is how we distribute our packs. For alchemy players, I think the ideal way of doing it is 30 packs from Wilds of Eldraine. You will forego the additional rare, but for that, you are able to buy the alchemy bundle for 20 packs with an expected price of just 15,000 gold. So you do end up getting more, but of course, the more and a good chunk of your initial investment are in those alchemy packs. So this is really only for the players that do want to embrace alchemy, whether it is for the alchemy format itself or later in historic. Now, just like any other limited environment, the environment created by Wilds of Eldraine is going to be heavily influenced by the combat tricks available. And just having done a rough count, there are a whopping 33 combat tricks in this, and luckily Flash is pretty light. I only found 2 instances of Flash at lower rarities. So you're definitely going to need to be aware of the different combat tricks, but to be honest, with 33, that is just way more than I could really cover in this video. So if you're going to sit down to a limited environment this weekend, I highly suggest looking over those and knowing what is out there. Mono Red, for instance, had 13 combat tricks available to it, and that's just almost unbelievable. Similarly, my rough count of mana fixers at lower rarities puts it at least 11 things to fix your mana within a limited environment for this set. So, well, Splashing a third color should be super easy, but I still wouldn't splash for things outside of the bombs and premium removal. I think it's still very easy to overtax the capabilities of your deck. And before we move into the sealed primer for those that are maybe considering a sealed event on Arena or going to a pre-release this weekend, I want to take just a moment to do a shout out to my patrons because they allow me to do cool shit like give away decks. What you got here is a code for 2 deck redemption from the 2021 budget year. So for a new player, these are probably entirely new cards that are going to be eternally playable. The code as seen on screen is 153B8-1C-B19-CC94 blank 95112 blank E115, because of course I've got to get you to do a little bit of work to figure out what numbers go in those 2 blanks. So good luck to you. Feel free to post once the codes have been claimed to save other people's time. I have no issue with that whatsoever. But thank you, my viewers, and especially thanks to my patrons that allow me to do things like this. For every 3 patrons that I have at the apprentice level or higher, that means I can do a giveaway every single month. So really awesome. Thank you guys. All right, so let's start this week's midweek magic off with a somewhat brief primer on sealed in general, because there are some differences between sealed and what I think probably most of you are more familiar with, draft. So whether you stand by Bread's bomb and removal based philosophy, or perhaps you've moved on to Keto's more efficient, evasive creature base, it's fair to say that Limited tends to be about playing your very best cards. And more often than not, that means your bombs and your premium removal. I know most of the times when I'm building a sealed pool, the first thing I do is look at my rares and mythics to see what bombs I have and what's worth building around, and then see how that lines up with the removal pieces that I got in the pool. Secondly, you need to make sure you have a reasonable curve to the cards that you're playing. You need enough things in your 1, 2, and 3 drop slots that means you won't get run over in the early game, because if you don't do anything until turn 3, you're probably going to die on turn 4. On the other side of that coin, of course, you want to make sure you have enough things at your top end, your 4, 5, and 6, and beyond slots in some cases, that you have late threats that allow you to go over the top if the board state has stalled. The lack of card selection in a sealed pool typically means you want to avoid those more aggro-aggressive decks. It's very hard to open a random pool and get enough synergy there to make that work. Of course, if you do happen to open a very good aggressive pool, something like a red-white aggro, there's no reason to not play it. It's just not very likely. And of course, Magic is always going to be a game of turns, which is defined by drawing cards. So our old friend card advantage is always going to be relevant. More often than not, playing a card that grants you some form of card advantage is going to be a very good thing. In Sealed, it is statistically advantageous to take the draw. Yep. You heard me right. I know this goes kind of against the conventional wisdom of Magic that being on the play is good. But when it comes to Sealed, the concepts of the limited pool, card advantage, and the less likelihood of playing an aggro deck means taking the draw leads to more wins. Of course, again, if you happen to open and run that rare aggro pool, this might go the other way. And in sealed, much like many other limited environments, it's a good idea to save your removal for when your opponent drops those bombs. Sure, you can use your 2-drop removal to take out their 1 or 2 drop, but you're really going to hate that decision when they drop that late game 6/6 evasive creature. And of course, it really makes sense to know as much about the limited environment as you possibly can. But of course, early in the season like this, that can be problematic. What I do highly recommend is take a few minutes and know the combat tricks that are going to be relevant for that particular limited environment, because there's nothing worse than getting blown out in the red zone. And now that we've covered the basics, let's move on to the specifics of this limited format.